Thank you for joining us for the first conference sponsored by the College of Humanities and Social Sciences here at William Paterson University. I'm Professor Stephen Thompson. I know some of you as colleagues, and I see a lot of students in the room as well. We welcome you. We hope you'll join us not just for the current session, but if your schedule permits and your interest is such, we'll have a very interesting set of panels throughout the day. We have a keynote speaker at 11 and another panel at 2 o'clock today, so consider yourselves invited to stay with us. But to begin, we'll have some remarks, some opening, welcoming remarks from the Dean of the College of Humanities and Social Sciences, Dr. Cara Rabbit, and she'll be followed by the Provost of the University, Ed Wild. So, Dean Rabbit.
Thank you, Dr. Thompson. Can you hear me? My voice can be a little quiet. You got it? Reaching you? All right. Thank you. Equity, let me make sure I get the title right. Equality, justice, and democracy. We talk a lot about citizenship in general as part of the mission of the university and certainly as part of the mission of the college. I happen to be one of those people who is a fanatic voter. I vote in every election. I missed one, and it still rankles me. And it was a primary in which the candidate I supported was running uncontested, but I still feel that the election process is vital for a democracy to function. And your participation today is also vital in that process, because I remember one time as a faculty member being in the class urging my students to vote and having somebody say to me, but I don't know who to vote for or how to vote. That was the day before the election. That decision is on us as citizens to engage in an understanding, to follow the dialogues, to question the answers. Many of you may have watched the debates in which there were absolutely contradictory facts presented, and then it becomes our job as citizens to sort out that information and try to understand. I was on campus last week for an event, the Distinguished Lecture Series. We had Carl Bernstein come. Some of you may know him from All the President's Men and the story of the Watergate, breaking that scandal open. And one of the points that he said that I really took as a takeaway for us as engaged members of society was that facts without context are not truth. And how we determine what the truth is and how we can explore that is part of what is our responsibility as individuals. So I'm thrilled that this is the way in which we open up what we hope will be an annual event in the College of Humanities and Social Sciences. It has been a chance for the committee members to come together across disciplines, share in very engaging debates, ideas on how to move forward. But the success of the whole conference is both the efforts of those committee members, whom I will thank in just a moment because they have been amazing, the presentations and the rich knowledge that our panelists bring us, whom I also thank, but also the participation of you. It is those three together that create this space for us to engage in the thinking and dialogue that will lead us towards the engaged citizenship that we speak of as far as our mission. So please let me take a moment to thank the College-wide Conference Committee. As I mentioned, this is our first, we hope, annual conference, and it is meant to be a real community-building event across the disciplines of the humanities and social sciences. The co-chairs of that, you've just met Dr. Thompson, he's one of the co-chairs. Madhuri Mukherjee from Languages and Cultures just stepped out to go to engage in business for the conference, but they were co-chairs together. And members of the committee, if you could please rise as I name you off. We have Denise Ussel from Sociology. We have Danielle Wallace from Africana World Studies. We have Maria Cremidas from Anthropology, Rosa Soto from English and Latin American and Latino Studies, Minhee Go from Political Science, also out doing conference business outside. Christine Kelly has also been a vital member of this group. And I have to thank especially Dr. Wartina Davis, Interim Associate Dean of the college, who not only helped lead this committee, but also, if you would please rise in the back there, also this was really her brainchild. She brought the idea of creating such a conference with her when she came into the college administration. So I thank all of them, I thank the panelists, and I thank all of you for being here, and I very much look forward to the discussion and the conference this morning. Thank you. And allow me to introduce Dr. Edward Weil, Provost and Executive Vice President of Academic Affairs at the University.
Thank you. Thank you, and good morning. I'm very happy to see such a large crowd here today. Many young faces out there. Let me add my congratulations to the College of Humanities and Social Sciences for inaugurating this program, the deans, of course, and all the faculty that have been involved in its planning and the events that will take place today. Humanities and Social Sciences, of course, is where many ideas from many different perspectives are explored. And the intent, I know, of this conference today is to explore some of those ideas to help to inform your choices that are coming up in the elections and to intrigue you about topics you may not have time to explore in your daily activities. It's going to be an important day just in terms of the exchange of those kinds of ideas and the exploration of those ideas. We're not trying to engage you to make up your minds in any particular way. We're here to get you to think about these particular topics of the day to help to inform any decisions you may be making over the next few weeks in the elections, and of course beyond that in your lives. How many of you are registered to vote? Beautiful. A topic dear to Professor Kelly's heart. How many of you have decided who to vote for in the presidential election?
Wow, interesting.
How many have still not made up their minds? How many are not going to vote? Okay, some of you didn't raise your hands. So I'm not sure quite where you stand on this, but I'm sure you're getting ready for election day a few weeks away. What is difficult to accept as you listen to the debates and as you listen to the sound bites and as you listen to coverage on the news or whatever media you may prefer, is that the ideas are never explored thoroughly. The arguments are never made. The data is never presented in all the ways that needs to be presented in order to have true exploration of the topics that are before you. Yes, the candidates may disagree and they take a position, but the deeper exploration of any of those topics is what is essential within a democracy and what is essential about what happens within a university, which is why this conference again is so timely and the topic is the topics are so important in the coming election and in the future. There are other elections taking place this year as well. It's not just the presidential election. We have a senatorial election taking place again, and congressional elections taking place. In fact, there was a debate here last night between two of the congressional candidates from a district in Bergen County, I believe. So they're out there making their case because time is running short at this point. I also want to say that on this particular ballot there is a unique opportunity for the citizens of New Jersey and particularly for those of us who are involved with university life. For the first time in many years, I believe it's since 1988. How many of you weren't born? in 1988, there's a bond referendum on the ballot which, if accepted by the citizens of New Jersey, would provide bond-generated funding for the construction of buildings and the improvement of facilities on university campuses. I'm not electioneering for this. I'm not allowed to within a public university. But I ask you to explore that particular topic as well, become familiar with that. There are articles, in fact, in today's newspapers, New Jersey newspapers, about the bond referendum, because it is very important that you consider that kind of election opportunity as well as the election for the various offices. So again, I'm very happy to see you all. You all here today. I'm very happy to see that you're engaged in the elections. I do encourage you as well to go out and exercise your rights as citizens. How many will be voting for the first time? There you go. It is quite an experience when you go into the election booth and cast those ballots. You'll see right up front what citizenry is all about and how you have a voice in the operations and the people who operate our government. So please make sure you do that. Again, I congratulate the faculty in the effort. I welcome our guests as well today who will participate in this, what I'm sure will be a very informative set of events. And I ask you to encourage your student colleagues to come to some of the later events in the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Provost Weil and Dean Rabbit. We begin our first panel this morning. This microphone is a little better than the other one. Our first panelist is Jeannine Frisby LaRue. She is Senior Vice President of the Kaufman Zita Group, a lobbying and public affairs firm in New Jersey, a top-noted one, I might add. She joined KZG, as it's known, in 2011, after retiring from Rutgers University as Vice President of Public Affairs, where she served in the university president's cabinet. Prior to joining the university's administration, Frisby LaRue served as Deputy Chief of Staff for former New Jersey Governor John Corzine, a former English teacher. She counts adjunct professor, college administrator, and trustee for the Camden County College and the Essex County College, among the many positions she has held. She's long been a champion of issues affecting women and children, and this is something of note, I think. She convened the first ever statewide women's summit back in 1992. The success of that event was noted by then Governor Whitman, who in 1994 made the annual event a function of state government, in fact changing its name to the Governor's Conference for Women. That event has continued under every governor since, and today attracts more than 2,000 participants annually. She continues to be involved in organizing that event today. She's honored by more than 60 organizations and is a graduate of what used to be called Glassboro State College, is now known as Rowan University. So she's a product of New Jersey higher ed all the way around, it seems. We welcome Jeannine Frisby LaRue.
Thank you very much, Doctor. I am so excited about being here this morning. I love talking to students. I can't think of any better way to spend my time when we talk about public policy, politics, elections, than to have a dialogue with students, because as a 62-year-old woman who has been in this business for about 40 years, I get the joke. You guys are truly in charge. And so I'm not going to talk too much about political persuasion, Democrats, Republicans. I'm hoping we can talk about process and really talk about issues and talk about where we could end up in the future based upon what we decide to do on Election Day. It's no secret, and I see such a diverse group of folks sitting in front of me. It is no secret that we consider being in this country one of the most magnificent things in the world because of the freedoms that we have, the freedom of speech, the democracy, to be able to go to polls and cast a vote for individuals who we strongly believe in. I happen to be a registered Democrat. Might not surprise a lot of you in the audience. I happen to vote for Democrats and Republicans based upon the issues that affect me as an individual. I am very versatile when it comes to going into that booth and closing the curtains and casting my vote. I would like to ask a question, just of curiosity. How many of you actually are residents of the state of New Jersey, sitting in the audience? All right, great. Because I do want to talk about the local dynamics of politics here, the state level, and then the national. We'll save the presidential for last. Here in the state, as you know, we have a lot of municipalities. Mayors are up for re-election and council people. I just happen to come from a city, Trenton, where my mayor is on the verge of being indicted. So we thought we might have an election in 2014. Depending on how that issue goes, we could be voting on a new mayor as early as the beginning of 2013. I think that the most contentious election locally right now in the state of New Jersey is the re-election campaign of the mayor in Perth Amboy. If you love politics and fascinated by the process, I would strongly encourage you to get on your computers and iPhones and iPads and follow the conclusion of that particular race. It is really exciting. In the political world, things are pretty much run by state partisan committees. So this particular mayor is a Democrat. There are some Democrats who strongly feel that she supported more of the Republican issues during her term than Democrats, and I happen to believe that she's done what she feels is in the best interest of the people she serves, because she does have a Republican governor. So yesterday, the chairman of the state Democrat Party actually endorsed her opponent. But the polls say that she already is supported by 62% of the vote in her town. She is Latina. The person that they found to run against her is Latino. So it's going to be a really fascinating ride how that particular election concludes. So watch that one between now and Election Day, but also Election Day. There's a lot to learn there watching that particular race. Then we have on the state level, we have Senator Lance, who actually went to Congress, and that opened up a seat. So we have two women running now for, and this is a special election, we have two women running for a seat in the Assembly. Now what's fascinating about that particular race is one of the women, Donna Simon, she is Republican, she's a wonderful, wonderful person. Her position, she really does hold on to most of the positions of the governor. So she does not support marriage equality, which, as many of you might know, it's a major issue here in New Jersey. Ironically, I just happen to have been the contracted lobbyist who was in charge of leading that particular campaign in the legislature. So we have in the state, more than 50% of the voters in the state do support same-sex marriage. So we have Donna, who opposes that, but she supports a lot of other really good issues. She is being challenged by a woman, Marie Corfield, who many of you might know because she's the teacher who came to a town hall meeting and challenged the governor about how he handled his conversations about teachers. And it went viral on YouTube, over 1 million hits. And she decided, well, you know what? If I'm going to have that much to say about issues, maybe I should run for public office. So you have these two women who are running against each other for an assembly seat. You also have Gabby Mascara, who is kind of interesting about Gabby, who is a sitting assemblywoman, but she ran in a district where it was redistricted, and I don't know if you know about the process of what has happened last year and this year for redistricting, but every 10 years, the districts in New Jersey could change, well, really all around the country, because of the census. So the districts changed in New Jersey for the legislators, and effective this year, so those who ran last November were running in newly established districts. This particular candidate lived in one area that was a part of the district where she filed her petition to run for assembly, but in the new district that would be effective 2012, she wasn't in that district, and it was challenged. So even though she won the election, she has been forced to run again this year because they said that she wasn't living in the district that she won last year. Hers is not a competitive race at all, so she will probably win by a landslide, but I think it's just the aggravation for her to have to raise all this money and get out there on the trail again, because next year the entire state legislature is up in the state of New Jersey. And I want to say that again, those of you who live in New Jersey, the entire state legislature, 120 seats, and the governor's seat are up next year. So I would strongly urge you to really sit up straight and pay attention. When this election is over, be savvy on the issues, understand the process. Wherever you can, get engaged. I don't care which candidate is your choice. Get engaged with someone, because next year is going to be an amazing election year. As you know, our governor is a national darling of the Republican Party. The media absolutely loves him, and he has an extremely high approval rate here in the state of New Jersey. The Democrats are still determined that they want to take back the front office in next year's election. So it's going to be fascinating if you're engaged in this campaign on either side. I guarantee you, you will learn more from that experience than you could ever learn by reading your textbooks or even sitting in your classes. It's just a process that I strongly would hope that you would get involved in. I want to talk about the congressional races. As I said, we had redistricting for the state legislature, but we also had redistricting for the congressional districts. You get 6 people to serve for each party to sit on this commission, and then the 6 people must come together and come up with a compromise candidate to break the tie. I was honored to be asked to serve on the redistricting commission for Congress. And I will tell you, and it goes back to what the dean said, I think it was the dean, who said that, you know, what you see on TV and in the debates, that's one thing, but you gotta make sure that you do your own due diligence so that you find out the facts. Because I was sitting, we were sequestered in the hotel there in New Brunswick, and I was reading the paper what reporters said was going on during this process, and I have to tell you, I didn't recognize anything in the articles. What was happening in those lockdown rooms did not resemble at all what we were going through. We lost people, we lost population here in the state, which meant that we had to actually give up a congressional seat. And being in this district where you are, you probably, if you have been paying attention to it, you probably know that Congressman Pascrell and Congressman Rothman had both been in the in Congress for 24 years. And in the Rothman's district had changed so that he found himself, and we tried to protect him, the Democrats did, but the tiebreaker, Dean Farmer of the Rutgers Newark Law School, Dean Farmer cast a vote that went against the Democrat map. So it meant that Rothman had to run in a predominantly Republican district. So does anyone in the audience know what he chose to do? Well, he chose to run against his friend and colleague and Democratic peer in the district where he used to be mayor. Yeah, that's the other thing. You don't have to live in a district to run for Congress. You don't have to live there to run for Congress. So he decided to take on, in a primary battle, Congressman Pascrell. That was one of the most expensive congressional races in the state. Pascrell won. He's a 70-some-year-old man, almost 80, and Rothman is about my age, a little bit younger. He might be in his late 50s, and everybody thought the old man was gone. Basically, that's what they were saying. It's really a shame. Bill's a great guy. He'll never be able to sustain the kind of campaigning it will take to go up against his buddy, and he won 4.5 to 1. That was a very, very exciting race. So now we have this district, this new set of congressional people, but I believe that for the most part, the incumbents will remain the same. They probably all will return to DC. So this now brings us to, and I want to do just a little differently than the provost because he doesn't want to engineer elections, and I'm going to engineer a little bit, if you don't mind. I want to talk about this bond. It is true that, and coming out of a higher ed environment, I just absolutely support anything that's going to make your lives easier and prettier, because it's, the buildings that can be constructed with these bonds, the types of things that will happen to labs and all across the state, it's exciting. But there's another part of this bond referendum that you should be concerned about. It is going to put tens of thousands of people to work if this bond referendum goes through. And the reason being, you're going to see shovels in the ground where laborers all across the state will be able to get back to work, because you know what the unemployment rate is now. And this bond referendum, if it's voted up by the electorate here in the state, the spring is going to be an exciting time. You're going to hear a lot of buzzing around, even in your own campus, on your own campus, with a lot of folks who are going to be gainfully employed again. So I would strongly, strongly encourage you. The fear about the bond, more than 60% of New Jerseyans who were polled said that they are strongly in support of spending this kind of money for higher ed institutions. The problem is, so many people go into the polls, and you're standing there, you're looking at presidential, U.S. Senate, Menendez versus Corrillis, then you're going through Congress, and you're going through the rest of the ticket, and most people just kind of like, okay, I did it, I voted for my candidates, and they walk out. You must vote that full ballot. We really ask you to just stand there, take a little time to read it. If you trust me, you don't even have to read it, just vote yes. But if you don't trust me, go ahead and read it and make a decision, but vote that whole ballot. All right, so we're going 5 minutes, they said. So here we are, 5 minutes for the president. This has been an interesting campaign, and I think what's a little different about it this year than 2008 is that social media has weighed in a way that we never anticipated in an election in the United States of America. I don't know if you get on Twitter during the debates, but it lights up unbelievably. The candidates are very, very different in their positions on a lot of issues. Women, the issue of women's issues, that's what's going to make or break this election. One of the things that we're finding with President Obama back in '08, minorities, particularly blacks, were very excited about his candidacy, and also students were excited about his candidacy. There is still some excitement, but it's not at the high level that it was back in 2008. Remember that the next president will make the determining factor of the Supreme Court. And if it's a more conservative Supreme Court, it may be left up to states to decide the reproductive choices of women. Most of the tax deductions will be expiring in January 2013. The next president will have to work with Congress to make a decision what that's going to look like. So there are a lot of issues at stake. I'm going to stop there, and after the next panelist finishes, then any questions you have, I would like to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we'll hear from Professor Christine Kelly, who's a professor of political science here at William Paterson. Her PhD is from Rutgers, and she has in political theory. Her research and teaching cover a unique intersection of political and social theory in the context of U.S. institutions, politics, and culture. She's currently serving as the director of the American Democracy Project here at William Paterson, which is part of a national project whose goal is to raise the civic awareness and political participation levels of students who attend public institutions of higher ed in the U.S. Her publications include the book from 2001 called Tangled Up in Red, White, and Blue, New Social Movements in America, a little Bob Dylan reference. And she's completing her second book, Chimes of Freedom, Student Protest and the Changing American University, both on Rowman and Littlefield. We welcome her.
Well, good morning. Some of you know me, and for some of you, I may be a new face. I want to thank the panelists and the College of Humanities and Social Science and the great team that put the conference together. Just before I begin, does any of my YV2K12 team members bring the literature? Brilliant, Maya's here. Maya, if you would not mind passing out a brochure and ask for some help, if we could actually get some brochures in students' hands, that would be a great help. Because some of the things I'm going to talk about are referenced in this brochure. But I'm going to try and integrate a lot of information, a big national picture, in some ways a global picture of young people, and then talk about our local efforts to get you more engaged in the electoral process, and then bring it back out to the national picture again in terms of sort of what are the trends and the context in which your enormous power, the best kept secret in America, I like to argue, is the power of young people to influence the direction of this nation, and your enormous power that you have, largely untapped but on the move. So let me first begin by painting a picture of your generation, of which I've written about. I recently published an article, and I'm going to draw a little bit on some of the ways that I've been trying to frame your generation. I like to refer to your generation as Generation Threat, because threats both define you and your life prospects, enormous threats, and in fact, you are, based on numbers and profile, a threat to politics as usual, and you are a transformational generation. That doesn't always happen, but there is a moment emerging which will not just determine your lives, but the lives of those who follow behind you. And I guess in some ways I want to bring to you this picture so that you begin to feel your power and the responsibility of this moment in time. So let me talk about why I call you Generation Threat. In my writings, I've discussed that there are four major threats. I call them the Four Horsemen that characterize the challenges you face. And those are joblessness, debt, incarceration, and environmental blight. That this generation, your generation, has the highest recorded unemployment in the history of labor statistics in the United States. And of course, when we control for subgroups within that, when we start to talk about young Latinos, young African Americans, the picture becomes even more dire in some ways. So your generation, and I don't, let me say this at the outset. This is not a bum you out presentation, okay? I'm not trying to bum you out. But we're trying to deal with reality here, all right? So you face the highest joblessness rate, the highest unemployment rates in recorded labor statistic history. In other words, they didn't keep statistics in the Great Depression. That provoked the keeping of statistics. So you're probably on par. Debt. Of course, you sitting in this room, the lucky 1/3 of young Americans who even get to go to higher education. Only 1/3 of young Americans are enrolled in an institution of higher learning. And again, if we control for subgroups, that becomes a smaller percentage. But as a result of changing funding streams and the inflated costs of higher education, you are a generation that carries enormous debt, primarily student loan debt. And when we begin to think about what joblessness and student loan debt mean in the long run, we know there's a disaster emerging in the future unless something important is done. So we also are watching the highest student loan default rates emerge as well. Makes sense? And again, there's hope. This is also a generation that has the highest incarceration rates in U.S. history. Sadly, the U.S. has the highest incarceration rates across all age groups of any nation in the world. And we have the highest incarceration rates of young people, and we sadly hold the uncontested #1 spot for having the greatest number of young people serving out life sentences in jail, far and above, and it's actually a statistic almost unheard of in other countries. And lastly, without going into too much detail, we all know that we face great environmental threats, some of which some scientists argue are irreversible, others which require immediate attention for the global survival, the planetary survival. All right, that's the bum you out part. Here's the hope. Why are you who face such threat and such precarity, right? Precarity, right? You are in an insecure place in many ways. Because you are also numerically and sociologically unique and powerful. And those two things combined serve to threaten politics as usual and create a great opportunity for you to leverage who you are, what you care about, and your incredible numbers against politicians and against, in fact, the entire way that electoral politics have taken place. But again, it requires education and mobilization and taking responsibility for what's happening. So let me talk about why you are a threat in terms of numbers. If you are, the brochure's not out, they're getting out. Are they being handed out? Yeah? Oh, you did. Okay. So if you open up your little brochure, you'll see that we talk about big numbers, big differences, big issues, all of which combine to make you, as a generational profile, a big threat. So the numbers are that there are 43 million. I don't have my brochure in my hand, but I've been doing this stump speech for a while, so I should have the numbers off the top of my head. You have a full 1/4 of the eligible voting population. At the same time, you don't vote at the same levels as older generations. So we haven't seen this phenomenon where young people share this great, enormous share of the overall population since the baby boom. So you all have heard about the baby boom in your various courses and that they help define and shape the character of America. We are at that moment again. You have numerical advantage. And when it comes to elections, numerical advantages rattle the cages of politicians if they are mobilized, registered, and voting. So you have a numerical advantage as a generation. You also demonstrate enormous sociological and attitudinal differences from older generations, which are not measured by traditional party ideologies or party platforms often. In other words, who are you and how have you changed compared to previous generations? You are much more diverse in terms of ethnicity and race than previous generations. And by that, what I really mean to point out is that your generation is a full 1/4 of your numbers are either themselves foreign-born or the children of foreign-born parents. In other words, right, you have immigration stories in your immediate families at a level we haven't seen in the United States since the big waves of immigration at the turn of the last century, right, which I'm sure you studied in your history courses. So that creates a different dynamic in terms of your aspirations, the issues that matter to you, and the challenges you face. You also tend to be socially more tolerant, and let me just say in plain speak, you're less racist, you're less homophobic, you're more, it's a sort of a kind of like, so what's the big deal attitude amongst your generation? Like, what's the big deal about gay marriage? What's the big deal about women's rights? Like, it's an assumption attitudinally on your part. 70% of young people polled in a number of studies demonstrate that they support, for example, marriage equality. It just doesn't seem as big an issue for you as your older counterparts. So you have significant social, attitudinal, and even can be translated into political differences that are uniquely characteristic of your generation. You also tend to be less supportive of wars, and you are also concerned about a few things: jobs, education, and environment does factor in there. It's not quite as immediate in your day-to-day lives when polled, but you are concerned about jobs and education. Does that sound right? Are you concerned about getting out of here and getting a job? Yes. Are you concerned about staying here and your loans? Yes. Yeah, okay. How many young people in the room right now are themselves the first in their families to go to higher education? You raise your hands? All right. How many of you are the second in your family's history to go to By that I mean first generation. I don't mean like your brother went before you. I mean, how many of you are the first generation to go to higher education in your family? That's what I really wanted to know. Okay, interesting, okay. All right, so those are your differences, those are your issues, and when we bring them together, what we see is that you are a big threat. Oh my God, 5 minutes, okay. So where does this bring us? This brings us to the fact that young people, we've seen since 2000, we have watched a trend, which is that young people are beginning to enter into the ballot box at higher rates. We have had an 11% increase amongst young voters, who are largely the lowest voter turnout group, age group, and as a result, their issues do not tend to get on the agendas of politicians. When polled, state-level party organizations, the traditional mobilizers of voters, right? State party leaders in national polls ranked, only 6% of state party leaders said that the future of their parties depends on young people. What I really want to say today, one of the takeaways I want to say today, is that the traditional party system is failing young people. It's beginning to take notice because of what happened between 2000 and 2008, which was an 11% increase in young voters, which only brings you to 51% turnout in 2008. Only 51% of eligible young people in 2008 came out to vote, but it was a game changer in 2008. If we take the youth vote out of key states, races, President Obama does not win that election. Now again, I'm not promoting a candidate over another. I'm telling you who you are and how you have been having an impact. So a lot of media right now are saying, what's going to happen with the young people? Will they come out for the president as they did in 2008? And some of the media coverage is saying, you're not as interested. You're unlikely to come out. I would like to suggest that that is not true, and yet there is a different quality and a different texture to what's going on. Young people were mobilized in 2008 to come to the polls, largely because of this unique historic candidacy, which more young people supported the Democratic candidate for president in 2008 than the Republican. At the same time, it was an enthusiasm of hope, right? That was the tagline, and it worked with you guys. At this moment, I think a lot of you are beginning to get the picture, but there's a sense of fear. So we've moved from a politics of hope to a politics of fear in a way, because your lives are in fact more precarious by measures. And actually, you're not doing as well in 2012 as you were in 2008. And the debate becomes, is that President Obama's fault, or is that the wreckage of something set in motion prior to his candidacy? Has he failed you, or are things not as bad as they might have been? That's for you to decide. But what we are seeing is that young people are in fact registering at great rates, and we see that in our own campus. And here I just want to begin, just quickly talk about what's happened here and bring it down to New Jersey a bit, which is that here on our campus, we have registered this semester, in the 2012 registration cycle, our Youth Vote 2K12 team has registered more than 730 of you. And actually what I'd like to brag about is that since 2004, between 2004 and 2008, we registered for almost 1,500 new voters, and between 2009 and today, we've registered another 1,000 new young voters. Just in this area, just from our campus and just in the regions, as you see our residential patterns, you have an incredible ability to impact regional, local, statewide, and national elections. In 2008, the national increase was 11 percentage points in the youth vote since 2000, but in New Jersey it was 13%. Jersey came out. Young New Jerseyans came out to the polls in 2008. 1 year later, in the gubernatorial race, not only did that bump up, not manifest. There was a 6% loss in the youth vote from the last gubernatorial data. Now, some people would like to say that's your fault. And in fact, there is a responsibility you have. But what we know from youth voting studies is that you come out to vote when politicians speak to you about your issues through the mediums of communication that you are engaged in, such as social media. And right now we're at a moment where these party organizations, the apparatuses of mobilizing voters, are themselves having to deal with the generational transformation that you represent. There is I like to call it the industrial model of party organization and party mobilization. It's a dinosaur, and it doesn't see you coming, except for a few prescient politicians. When you are registered to vote, once you're registered, your turnout is close to 90%. So the challenge becomes registering you to vote, and then you hearing messaging in those places you frequent from politicians directly talking to you. But if they don't think you're voting, they're not looking for you, and they're not worried about you, and they're not talking about your issues. And then they are therefore not accountable to you. So one of the great, how should I say, moments we're trying to look for right now is whether 2008 was a fad or the beginning of a trend or a movement that in fact has the power to transform American electoral politics and American public policy. Because when we look at generation threat and the issues that face you, those are the issues that are this country's future. If these issues can't be addressed and solved, then the country's future is at stake. And so it's a lot of power and it's a lot of responsibility. One of the questions I really want to bring to you as young voters is, are you going to wait for them to come to you? Or will you make yourselves unavoidable? Because you tend to lay back and wait. That's what the studies show us. And what I'm suggesting to you is that you get in the middle of the road. Maybe not politically, that's up to you. But get in the road, block the traffic until they must see you and must confront these enormous threats that define your life and your future. You do have the power, and in fact, you have the responsibility. So register to vote, go vote, but figure out what you care about and take one or two issues and become an expert in it, and then hold these politicians' feet to the fire. It's up to you.
Thank you.
I didn't do my so much for the PowerPoint, I guess.
We have time for questions from the audience. There are microphones at either end of the room. Anyone who has a question, I'll see if I can moderate that a little bit. Are the microphones around? They're coming around. Well, maybe while people are getting to the mics, oh, and there already is somebody. We have a question. Well, we almost have a question, so I'll ask my question, which I was sitting on. Both of you talked a lot about the responsibility that a person has, and a lot was directed at young people, for instance. And I wonder if either of you has something to say, maybe both of you, briefly, about why a person should care. I mean, I'm a lifelong voter too. I think a lot of people in this room share that. And there is something magical about being in the voting booth and saying, oh yeah, this is what a citizen is. But not everyone has that. And I wonder if you have something to say to the person who says, well, in a way I'm voting by not voting, right? I'm saying the system does not serve me or doesn't speak to me. Do you have some reason you could give to the person who's sort of opting out, maybe even mindfully?
I'd like to just make a couple comments about that and then turn it over to the doctor. I've had an opportunity to see government from the outside and from the inside. I served as an elected official for 12 years. I've been a registered lobbyist for, as I said, almost 40 years, and have been both an appointed official as well as serving on the inside of an administration in Trenton. And one of the things that I've come to know, and as the doctor said, that we're at a crossroads again of how young people can change the direction of this country. I am a baby boomer. I was there during the 60s. And I can tell you that our getting involved in that process back in the 60s, I can look at an enormous amount of rights that were won during that era that some of them we thought would be irreversible, but they're being challenged again. The Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act. I mean, there were so many magnificent things that my children and grandchildren get to enjoy today. You may not think that your voices are heard. I debate with my granddaughter, who is 19, and my grandson, 26, every day about it. It's just one vote, nobody listens, politicians don't care. It's the squeaky wheel gets the oil. And unfortunately, if you're not registered today, you're past the voting deadline because you had to have registered by yesterday. So that's unfortunate, but you can still look forward to, if you want to do a primary, vote in June or vote next year. But once you register to vote, you've got to, and once you vote, you've got to stay engaged in the process. The legislators, politicians are people, and they listen to who shows up. You know, when I'm in Trenton, Mondays and Thursdays, sitting there in the legislature lobbying, I'm lobbying for people who can afford to pay $5,000, $6,000 a month to retain a lobbyist. And guess what? None of those dollars are coming from students or student organizations. When I sit in the audience with the legislators sitting in the front and I'm debating issues where people have retained me to debate those issues, there's nobody in the audience who looks like you coming into the legislature fighting for lines in a bill that determine the direction of your lives. So there is a reason to vote. There definitely is a reason to vote. But once you do it, that job, you're just a quarter of the way there. You got to stay engaged.
I just want to say something about that. You know, there was an old wisdom in political science that came out of the 50s. Robert Dahl was one of the proponents of this idea that, when people, non-voters, are essentially, should be read as happy with the status quo. And, you know, I was a student of a couple, Piven and Cloward, Why Americans Don't Vote, who really challenged that thinking, which when we look at the patterns of registration, which, by the way, the U.S. has the most encumbered, you know, access to the vote process of any advanced capitalist democracy. In other words, most nations don't ask you to go through all these different steps before you get to the vote. One of the things we see is when states have, you know, registration, same-day registration laws, young people have much higher turnout rates. Poor people have much higher turnout rates. Lower income people. And these are the groups that are least represented under the current electoral registration and participation system. So one of the things that we need to do is get those groups into the process enough so that we begin to change some of these laws that inhibit, suppress, and repress people from being able to represent their interests because they don't have a lobbyist.
Right.
They have a vote if they're registered. So we really think, I think that the idea that sitting out is I'm happy. It may be I'm paralyzed or I'm just too, how should I say, burdened by the day-to-day, and nobody seems to care about me. So this is one of the things I think that young people who are attending institutions of higher education, particularly public, you have a responsibility to those who are not, right, being able or encouraged to access the system. We go into high schools in the area. By the way, I want my team, I have some of my Youth Vote 2K12 team members. If you could just stand, because I want to recognize these student leaders. Maya, Tony, who else did I say? I want to recognize that these young people on this Youth Vote 2K12 team, 730 registrations. That's pretty impressive, don't you think?
Very
Somebody had to
impressive.
ask you to register to vote. Let's give them a hand. When we go into the high schools in Paterson, one of the things I ask students is, how many military recruitment tables did you see this year in your high school? And the hands go up in the counts and the conversations. How many voter registration tables, how many vote education talks did you receive? Almost none, or one or two. When government wants to find you for wars, they know where to get you, and they're very effective. But nobody's offering you a voter registration form at the same time. I find this profoundly frustrating because we know, why is it that we are not mobilized? Why is it that organizations, party organizations, Democrats or Republicans, are not actively seeking your incorporation into the political process? Partly because you are a game changer, you are a threat, you are an unknown, and it messes up their calculations. It also messes up their agendas, which are often for the few and not for the many. So this is really, this is a big deal, you guys. You are a big deal. And if somebody hasn't told you that, you have to ask yourself, why? Why is it Professor Kelly and YD2K12 and, why isn't anybody saying, we are a huge power, we young people? So, I keep saying that, but I don't think it's that people are happy. I think it's that people are disengaged.
If I could just respectfully challenge just a tad bit, because I do participate on the inside of campaigns quite a bit. And I know that, and I don't know what's happening on this campus, but I do know that both parties generally have some structure of reaching out to colleges to get them to participate in campaigning. I think one of the problems is, and I've been pretty dismayed about it, even with the urban areas this year, monies are put into demographics where they feel that they'll get the biggest bang for the buck. So for this election in the cities that would be considered the base vote of this sitting president, very little dollars have been put into urban areas for this campaign. If you look throughout the state, you'll see very few Obama signs. All that money is going to Pennsylvania and Ohio and all of the states where they really will make a difference in the electoral vote. The same thing is happening with the organizing on college campuses, that the dollars are being redirected into areas where they feel they can get the biggest bang for the buck. So I don't know that it's that they that they think that you're going to screw up the paradigm. It's just that it's about money.
But in a sense, that is the paradigm. That's the paradigm that this generation can break, which is the paradigm which is that we spend money where we know voters are already going to come out, and that's a vicious cycle because that continues to represent a set of interests that
I
have
think
been
it's a flip,
suppressed.
though. I mean,
They can flip that. They can flip that, is what I'm trying to say.
We know that the hour is such that people have other appointments they have to get to, and there's a very riveting discussion, and two experts on the local stuff, which I know nothing about, so I'm like learning a ton. For people who are staying a little bit, both Christine Kelly and Jeannine Frisby LaRue will certainly be here in the room. We'll all be here in the room. Linda Martine Alcoff will be speaking at 11, but maybe we'll pause here. Thank both of our panelists. And for any follow-up questions, here we are. Enjoy.
You know, it's